Good day, and welcome to Soft Skills, Strong Results, Practical Strategies to Master Interpersonal Communication. This is Season 2, Episode 4, and I'm Charlie Krebs, your host. Thank you for joining us. Today, my guest is Jeff Tobe. Jeff is a certified speaking professional who shows organizations how to gain the competitive edge by going beyond customer service and into customer experience. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
Jeff and I are both members of the National Speakers Association, as well as the Pittsburgh chapter of the of Toastmasters. In fact, we were at a meeting together yesterday. First of all, tell us a little bit about your business, if you will.
So I've been doing what I do for a long time, 30 years, actually. I'm celebrating this year. Kind of fell into the speaking business, and that's what I do. I'm a professional speaker, author, and trainer. My business is all centered, as you said, around customer experience. How do you make the leap from customer service to customer experience? And I've been so fortunate. I've spoken in 53 countries around the world, and customer service is a theme that is popular everywhere globally.
Well, before we get into that a little bit, how did you get into this as your niche?
As I said, I fell into it, as a lot of speakers do. My background is in marketing and advertising, had my own firm in Dallas, Texas. And one year we won all kinds of awards for creativity and promotions. International Association who awarded them came to me and said, would you put together just I think it was at the time, 45-minute talk for your peers at our national convention? I said, sure, I'd love to. I did it. 2 days later, a woman from Wisconsin called me and said, I heard you in Dallas. Would you come to Wisconsin and do the same thing? I said, sure. She said, what do you charge? I said, charge? You get paid to talk? And that started my speaking career. And by the way, I charge her $200 for the day. So that gives you an idea of how long ago it was. But I got to play at it for about 2 years. I had a great staff in my marketing firm, and I was out speaking. And then I ended up selling my company to one of my employees. I moved to Pittsburgh and started this full-time 30 years ago.
Excellent. Explain to us the difference between customer service and customer experience.
Thanks for asking, because most people group it together, and I think there's a huge difference. And that's what I've been preaching for the last at least 15 years. Customer service is what most companies do, and they probably do it well. I can name some who don't. I'm sure we all can, if you've ever flown an airline or called your phone company. But customer service is, what can I do for you? How can I help you? It comes from the heart. It's not going anywhere. I don't say that customer service is dead, but customer experience is the ability to step back and ask ourselves, what's my customer's experience from the minute they make contact with us till the minute they're done? And that involves so many more people than just one-to-one. You know, it's collaboration, it's teamwork. And so there's so much more involved in customer experience. It's more emotional, whereas service is more tactical.
So who are some of the people that are involved in this experience from the beginning?
A good question, because everybody is. And this is something that I have to drive home in every organization, is that your frontline workers are just as important in the customer experience as your C-suite. So everybody needs to be involved.
So when somebody experiences good customer experience, what's the payoff of that?
It's the story they're going to tell. So if you start thinking as in terms of what's the story that this customer, by the way, this member, this patient, you can substitute words. What's the story they're going to tell at their dinner table tonight about the interaction they had with us? That's when you start to get more, it's less mechanical than service. Service is solving a problem typically, right? And it's incredibly important in any organization. But the experience, is that emotion that you bring out in people.
So let's step back just for a second and talk about soft skills.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different definitions out there. I don't know that there's one perfect one, but how do you define soft skills?
I have the 3 C's when I think of soft skills. It's, communicate, collaborate, and connect. And don't forget, I'm talking about my specific lens of customer experience. There are a lot more things obviously involved, as you know better than anybody, in soft skills. But those 3 things in customer experience are probably the most important things. And I have to tell you that the hair on the back of my neck stands up. I got to ask you, I'm sure you feel the same way when you hear the word fluff associated with soft skills. And I think somebody misnamed it a long time ago. They should be critical skills.
I agree.
Yeah, you cannot offer an amazing, effective customer experience without soft skills.
So why do you think it took on that name, soft skills?
Yeah, because I think that it was probably a scientist or a mechanical engineer who named it. Very left brain analytical, and here's the skills we need to do our job, but here's the skills that we also have to learn.
So how do soft skills play into your training people?
You know, One of the things that I do, and I offer long-term training for organizations as well as just keynoting and speaking. And that's a 1-year customer experience journey. And one of the things that I talk about is the more engaged people are internally, the better the experience externally. That's kind of the umbrella. And that's the umbrella under which I train people. So it's all about engagement. And the more, like I said, the more engaged we can get people. So my theory is that engagements it starts at a grassroots level. It doesn't start from management and come down. It starts at a grassroots level and goes up. So now if we just focus on the employee experience, we're going to make the customer experience much better. Focusing on the employee experience is all about soft skills. How do we make them more empathetic, more agile or accountable, collaborate? How do we not make them, but how do we give them the skills that they may not have?
How do you do that? How do you train somebody to be more empathetic?
Yeah, I think it's about customization. It's about understanding who it is you're working with. It's not about training as a whole. I can give 30 people in a room the tools, but it may not apply to Charlie Krebs because of his situation. So I really try to get to know each person individually. And the way that I do that is when I go into an organization, the first thing I do is set up two entities. One is a customer experience council. It's made up of 60% management and 40% frontline. And size depends on the size of the organization. And then the most important thing is I have service excellence advisors. And these are 100% frontline people who, Charlie, I got to tell you, when they come into this, they're scared. I've had people cry because they find out that they're going to have to present a workshop to the rest of the organization. They do it in teams. They're not alone. And when I see them, when they, the self-confidence, the ability to present, as where they were crying when they first came in, that's how I kind of teach it. But if you're asking about specific skills, it really depends on the organization. It depends on the people.
So what do you think flips that switch for people when they come in and they're scared and they're crying to when they walk out and they're confident? What's that internal switch like?
Yeah, I think it's about recognition. I think that many times these people have never been recognized. One of the things that I do, just as an example, I just did it. I just heard results yesterday from an organization I'm working with, and that is just somebody on that advisory board was walking down the hallway, and their CEO was coming the other way, and the CEO stopped and called and talked to them or mentioned their name. I know it sounds silly, but this
Not at all.
this
Not at all.
person was so excited that the CEO knew her name. That's recognition is part of it. That's part of that switch as you're talking about. It's also about, I keep saying about teamwork. Like I say, they won't be presenting individually. They present in threes. And because of that, they get to know people they've never worked with before. And it's that being comfortable with each other, I think, starts to get them engaged.
When you talked about somebody walking down the hall and the CEO knew their name, it comes back to what I talk about a lot is helping people feel valued. And I think there are so many different ways of helping people feel valued. Would it be fair to say that that's part of the customer experience?
Oh, without a doubt. Like I say, it starts internally. So if your people don't feel valued, let's look at it from another lens. If they don't feel valued, they're not going to be engaged. And so part of engagement is absolutely about feeling valued.
Can you take that feeling valued and take that customer experience and translate that into how a leader interacts with an employee?
Oh, without a doubt. And there's where the disconnect is in many cases, depending again on the size of the organization. So I work with mid-sized organizations, sometimes very large organizations. I actually have a niche with small rural hospitals. Long story why, but if they're a large hospital, then the leadership typically is all about training their front line. They're all about training mid-management, but they forget about training themselves, right? And soft skills, I think, and this may be a little bit on a tangent, but I really believe it's also about the environment you grew up with. It's not something and that's why we have to teach it. I'll give you an example. I grew up in retail. My dad owned a menswear store. And my dad used to say to me, people don't care how you feel. Just smile, shake their hand, and look them in the eye and help them with whatever they need. And so I grew up with that environment. I had to learn soft skills because I grew up thinking that nobody cares how I feel. And so I translate that to leadership in a way that many times it's somebody else that needs the training, not the leader themselves.
It's interesting you say that about the men's store. My father ran a men's store for many, many
Really?
years.
Yeah.
And so I worked with him a little bit. And so I watched him, and my father was very gregarious. And I think a lot of the times the reason he was successful at what he did was because he helped that person feel valued. In fact, at Christmas time, the wives of a lot, not to be sexist, but the wives of a lot of the Corning Glass CEOs would come in and say, Bob, I need to pick out a suit for my husband. Can you pick it out?
Yeah.
And they would trust him, and he would come through every time
Yeah.
doing that. What role do you think soft skills play in becoming a more effective leader?
Like I said, I think that leaders have to understand that it's not what you know, it's how you make people feel. And I feel strongly about that. And when I say that, sometimes I watch the C-suite around a table just look at each other like, you know, because they pride themselves on what they know. I used an example earlier, and I jokingly tongue in cheek about engineers and scientists. I'm working right now with a large organization that is 90, I'm guessing 90% engineers and scientists, and they're brilliant people. But the leadership doesn't understand that it's not what I know. That's how they got to leader because it's because of their skills. But I think that we need to be more aware of why we're promoting people into a leadership position. It shouldn't just be about their knowledge.
Right.
Right?
Do you find that some of these C-suite people that you work with are a little reticent because they don't understand the soft skills? And how do you bridge that?
It depends. And I'll say that sort of cautiously. It depends who decided they needed to be trained. So if it's a large leadership team who were told that they've got to be trained in soft skills, they're sitting there going, okay, teach me something in the next, 20 minutes, right? You know that person. But if leadership buys into it, and that's where I start with an organization, when they're even considering bringing me in, I sit the leadership team down, the executive team, whatever they call themselves, and I find out how reticent they are. How willing are they? Because they have to be the example, you know, and I know you believe this, that they have to be the example for the rest of the organization or this will never work. And I tell them that. I've even walked out of meetings saying, I really appreciate you, having me in to talk about it, but it's not going to work. I don't get the feeling that your leadership team has buy-in.
So let's say that they're not completely bought out, but how do you break through that reticence?
Yeah, so I think it's again about collaboration. It's about the way that you train. I think it's your method of training as well. I think it's also by proof, by proving to them either by using case histories and examples, or just proving to them statistically why this is going to pay off in the long run. They're looking at their bottom line. They're looking at their ROI, their return on investment. And so if you can prove right away, and that's where I focus initially is the return on investment in investing in soft skill training.
So how do you think soft skills affect the ROI?
Oh, it definitely affects the bottom line. I got to go back to engagement. There are a lot, the challenge with soft skills is that it's usually not on a dashboard. It's not measurable like sales numbers or whatever. Even customer service interactions can be measured. But I go back to the word engagement, and that is that there's lots of data on engagement. So it's kind of a step-by-step thing. If I can prove to you, the more engaged people are internally, the better the experience externally, when this is how it's going to affect the bottom line. Let's focus on engaging your people. Here's how we do it, right? And so it's not something that you can, there are numbers out there, as you know, on soft skills and how it affects my bottom line.
Do you think that people are innately wired to have good soft skills, or is it something that they completely have to learn from afresh?
Well, again, it goes back to environment, right? What did you grow up? How did you grow up? How did you grow up? Did you, your dad who was in the clothing business, was he teaching you soft skills?
I think he probably was.
Okay.
I mean, because I've been in the theater most of my life, and so I've always it was a good fit to go into communication because
Right.
I feel like I have empathy. I feel like I have good, emotional intelligence and things like that. And I think that I probably learned it from him.
Right.
My mother was also very gregarious with other people, and so I think without realizing it, that I learned those skills at home.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's incredibly important. And now you take the guy who's working on the automobile assembly line and, is he promoting soft skills with his kids? I even forget your original question, but
The
how
the, the question the question was, our soft skills, is there
is it
somewhere
innate?
inside of us that they're all innate?
Yes and no. I believe there is. I think it's like creativity. I talk about creative thinking first and foremost in all my presentations because I think you have to be flexible, creative to even start to consider taking on, acquiring these new skills. And creativity is something that I think is inside all of us. I truly believe everybody's creative. I mean, when were we most creative? When we were kids, right?
Right.
So it didn't just fall off. It's there.
Well, and we're not necessarily all artistic,
Right.
but I think there's a big difference between artistic and creative.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And so it's now, how did you use those soft skills? How were they promoted? Even in your first jobs. I worked for an insurance company and I was an insurance personal lines underwriter, and it was like, if they fit this criteria, they can be a client. If they don't fit this criteria, that was the whole job. And that did not use my soft skills.
Well, I remember when I got out of college, one of my jobs was to become a health and life insurance salesman up in New York State, and I went through all of the training and
Yeah.
everything, and I went out one time with one of the managers to try to sell insurance to people, and these people couldn't afford the insurance, and he tried to talk them into it anyway, and he just wasn't being understanding of them, and I walked in the next day and I said, "I quit. I can't
Right.
do this."
Yeah.
You know?
We have similar backgrounds.
So if somebody realizes that they're not good at soft skills
Mhm.
and they want to get better at it, and then they want their employees to get better at it, what would you recommend? How would they go about doing that?
I think, you mentioned Toastmasters, great example. We've seen the results of Toastmasters with a lot of young people, and that's all about communication. So becoming a better communicator, whatever it takes. Find a Toastmasters club in your city or your town. Secondly, put yourself in positions where you have to collaborate with other people, even if you don't do that for a living, but whatever that means internally. It can be the Christmas party, what do you call it? Sorry, committee. Couldn't think of the word. And the third part is connect with people that you don't normally connect with. So there's my 3 C's again, by the
Okay.
way, and I think that's important.
So if somebody wants to do that,
Yeah.
but they're just afraid, they're not good at connecting with people, and that's maybe why they work in a job where they don't have to deal with people.
Yeah.
How do you get them to trust themselves enough to step over that line?
That's the hard part, right? I once heard a trainer say, fear is just an acronym for false evidence appearing real. And it is very real to the person who's experiencing it. And I think that it's doing little things to get outside your comfort zone. An example, are you wearing a watch by any chance?
No.
Oh, okay. So in the beginning of all my talks, I have the entire audience take their watch or their bracelet off and hold it up. Then I have them put it back on their left arm. I'm sorry, their right arm, the other arm, we'll say. And I challenge them to just keep it on the other arm till the end of the day. It's about habits. What do they say? 21 days to make, break, or change a habit. I think it's about habits and understanding what habits you have and then starting just very small. How do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time. It's just challenging yourself to do some things that feel uncomfortable first. Don't make that giant leap yet, whatever that is to you.
Okay.
So it might just be wearing your watch or bracelet on the other arm for a day. It might be turning left instead of right out of your driveway in the morning just to see how else you could get to work. Whatever that is.
Well, I think what you're talking about is becoming aware.
Yes.
And self-awareness is a great cognitive soft skill. And I know that what I learned to do years ago is that when I send an email, I almost always start the email with hi and then use their name and then ask them how they're doing, or, maybe something happened in their life and ask them how that's going, and then get into the business of it. And people respond to that. Just like whenever I go to the grocery store, first thing I do is I say to somebody, "How's your day?"
Yeah.
And the most common response I get from people is, thank you for asking.
Right. Yeah,
Because I think people are used to being devalued.
absolutely. You know, it's funny, Charlie, you say that. My wife taught me many years ago that I send emails and typically I get down to business quickly. And then I got to go back and add that at the beginning of my emails to make a difference.
Well, and I think the tone of the email makes a big difference because you can tell that's why I just started writing hi
Right.
at the because, when we're texting, it's just like down to business.
Yeah.
But even in even in texting, I try to use good punctuation
Yeah.
and things like that. That's dating me a little bit.
Well, the challenge is that so many people are using AI right now, that it's not a personal medium. It's a great, I'm a promoter of AI, especially in customer service. AI, I think if you're just strictly a customer service person, you got to beware. I think that AI could possibly take over any customer service interaction. But they'll never take over customer experience because it's emotional. So using AI, don't just count on it. You got to add that personal touch, right?
Well, and you can when you're reading something, you can tell if AI has written or not because it's just and it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but it doesn't have that human quality.
Well, I find it often starts with in these days of this marketplace, whatever it is, that first, before the comma.
One of the things that we were talking about earlier, and you mentioned this when we were talking, you mentioned that feedback plays a big role in growing soft skills.
Yeah.
Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah. So again, we're going back also to your other question about effective leadership training. It's all about how you give feedback as well. But I think feedback obviously helps people grow. And the feedback we should be giving is about soft skills. Obviously it's easy to give feedback about mechanical skills. Yeah, you're not using this theorem or you're not using this whatever. But feedback with soft skills is so incredibly important, as you know. I need to know, what's working and what's not working if I'm going to get better at what I do.
Can you tell us what you think the difference is between emotional intelligence and soft skills?
Yeah, I think that emotional intelligence is one tool in the soft skills toolkit, I guess would be the way to say it. EI is, become so popular lately, and it's probably one of the most critical skills, but it's only one tool. And I think that so many people now are saying, if I can teach my people better EI, EQ, however you want to phrase it, they're going to be better at what they do. Yes, but there's a lot more, as you know, involved in it with soft skills.
Well, you had also said that you think that most corporate training programs miss the mark when it comes to soft skill development.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, this goes back to engagement. So, and I hate to repeat myself, but I think that they're not looking at their frontline people. They're looking at training their mid-level managers and their C-suite. And so I think that they're missing the mark. And I have to tell you that that's what keeps me in business right now is because when I go in and suggest that, stop looking only at your execs. Let's start looking at the people who actually are out there and probably have the most touch points with with the customer, with the patient, with
Right.
the member. Yeah.
Well, as we're winding down here a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about your books
Oh,
and your idea about coloring outside the lines, and then tell us how people can get in touch with you if they'd like
excellent.
to.
Thank you for asking. Well, Coloring Outside the Lines, just so you know, wasn't the original name of my company or my first book. I was walking along one of those walking sidewalks or moving sidewalks in Detroit Airport. Guy coming the other way, and he goes, "I know you. You're Coloring Outside the Lines." And it was the name of my presentation. He didn't remember my name. He had no idea where he had heard me, but he remembered that. And I said, I got to do something about that. So it's the name of my company, first of all, Coloring Outside the Lines. I trademarked it actually as it pertains to workshops and presentations. And it's actually I will, if I may, show
Yeah.
my book. It's actually the title of my first book. This is an older book. It still sells a lot of copies. It's in the third edition and the only book in the world illustrated by my then 12-year-old daughter. So it's a lot of fun. But my recent book is called The Lemonade Stand, and it's my first attempt at a business parable. And it's The Lemonade Stand, Customer Experience Lessons from a 9-year-old Entrepreneur. And like I say, it's a fable. It's a very short read, but I think it's really powerful. And people who have read it have told me that it's one of the most powerful books they've read. So I'm excited about that. People can find me just by my name. I have an easy name, Jeff Tobe, Tobe. And I'm Jeff at jefftobe.com, and they can reach out to me there.
Great. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. If you had to give our viewers one piece of life advice based on what you've written, based on what you've taught, what would that be?
Start looking for invisible opportunities where everyone else sees visible limitations.
Say that again.
Start looking for visible opportunities where everyone else sees visible limitations, where everyone else says it can't be done, where everyone else says, we tried that 4 years ago before you got here, it doesn't work, where everybody else says, you can't do that, in this industry or in this company. That's where the opportunities lie.
Wow, excellent. I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure seeing you again, and I appreciate all of your advice. Well, and thank you for joining us today for Soft Skills, Strong Results. I'm Charlie Krebs, and please remember that soft skills are the human side of success. Thank you. If you like what you heard in the podcast, check out my new book. It's called The Power Skills Portfolio, A Leader's Guide to Soft Skills. You can find the link in the show notes.